July 16, 2010. Pico Truncado, a small town in Argentina's Santa Cruz province. At dawn, the temperature across the Patagonian steppe drops below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Music in the early morning hours. A local resident who trains dogs is walking through an area known as Cordon Forestal, a wooded stretch on the outskirts of town. One of the dogs suddenly veers off the path and disappears into thick brush. The man follows the animal, and what he discovers will set in motion the most high-profile investigation this region has ever seen. Lying on the ground among the bushes is the body of a young woman. There are no visible signs of a struggle, but forensic specialists will later determine that she suffered 2 gunshot wounds fired at point-blank music range. The shots caused immediate death. Near the body, investigators recover 2 items: a partially smoked cigarette butt and a personal belonging, a vinyl record. Both appear to have been left behind in haste, as if someone fled the scene in a rush. The victim is identified as 20-year-old Johanna Casus. In Pico Truncado, she is well known as a popular and charismatic figure. Johanna Casus is dressed in elegant clothing, completely impractical for a winter walk through the forest. As officers secure the perimeter, patrol cars begin arriving one after another. This morning becomes a dividing line for the town. Music, a clear before and after, triggering a chain of events centered around 2 outwardly identical sisters and one man whose responsibility will remain the subject of debate for years. The story of the Casus family begins on July 19, 1990 in Pico Truncado. On that day, Marcelina and Valentine welcomed twin daughters into the world, Johanna Casus and Edith. In early childhood, the sisters were nearly impossible to tell apart, even for their own parents. But as they grew older, their personalities, social roles, and behavior moved in completely opposite directions. Johanna Casus chose a public life and pursued a career in the fashion industry. She was outgoing, driven, and dreamed of the runway, working steadily toward that goal. Her resume included victories in regional competitions and a prestigious title, Miss Buenos. At every public event in town, Johanna Casus appeared in eye-catching outfits with flawless makeup. Her parents made her ambitions the family's top priority. Marcelina and Valentine traveled with their daughter to pageants, paid for her training, and openly expressed pride in her success. To the public and even to extended family, Johanna Casus became the unquestioned pride of the Casus household. Edith Casus, by contrast, lived a withdrawn life. She refused to take part in fashion shows, avoided cosmetics, and preferred to remain invisible. Within the family hierarchy, Edith was pushed into the background. While Johanna Casus' achievements were celebrated, Edith was met with criticism for her passivity. Her parents openly faulted her for lacking ambition and for refusing to match the image of her successful music sister. This imbalance of attention created a rift between the twins, one that only deepened over time. By 2005, when the sisters turned 15, the contrast, music, had become a permanent part of daily Life. Johanna Casus stood at the center of both family and town life, while Edith existed in her shadow. Their identical appearance turned into a constant tool for comparison, and Edith always came up short. In that home, one daughter received resources and admiration while the other faced reproach and pressure to become a copy of her sister. It was this internal fracture that would ultimately shape Edith's future actions. In 2005, a new figure entered the lives of the Casus sisters, a man whose name would later become central to court records in the town. Victor Cingolani was 25 years old. At the time, he worked in the oil industry, the primary source of employment in Pico Truncado. Victor first met Johanna Casus, who was 15 at the time, during a community event, a bingo night. What began between an adult man and a young woman soon turned into a romantic relationship that lasted about a year and a half. According to people close to them, the relationship was unstable and marked by frequent conflicts. Victor Cingolani already had a specific reputation in town. He was known as a difficult individual with a volatile temperament, and music, a tendency to associate with questionable circles connected to the local criminal environment. He was also widely regarded as a womanizer. Music. In 2006, the couple officially broke up, and Victor and Johanna Casus went their separate ways. However, a year later, the situation took a turn that would later raise serious questions for investigators. Victor began growing close to the second sister, Edith. By that time, they were part of the same social circle and music regularly crossed paths at group gatherings. Aware of how complicated the situation was, Edith initiated a conversation with her sister before starting any relationship with her former partner. According to testimony on record, Johanna Casus responded that Edith was an adult and free to make her own decisions. With that consent, the relationship began. Cingolani's second romantic involvement with a member of the Casus family lasted about a year. This time the breakup was initiated by Victor himself. He explained that he wanted to live a free life without commitments and claimed he did not want to hurt Edith's feelings. After that, Cingolani formally ceased to be part of the family's inner circle. However, in July 2010, when police began identifying potential suspects, this chapter of Victor's past became critically important. Investigators found it highly suspicious that one man had entered into intimate relationships with twin sisters. In the eyes, music of detectives, this pattern suggested an unhealthy fixation on the image of Johanna Casus. To understand the events leading up to the discovery of the body in the forest, it is necessary to return to early 2010. During this period, Johanna Casus began a new relationship. Her partner was 37-year-old Marcos Diaz. Like her previous partner, he worked in the oil industry and had a reputation as a respectable, law-abiding man. The relationship progressed, music, quickly. In less than 6 months, Johanna Casus moved into Diaz's home. From that point on, people close to her began to notice clear changes in her lifestyle and daily behavior. Johanna, once known for her Energy and frequent appearances in public became increasingly withdrawn. Friends noticed that she attended town events far less often, and when she did go out, she was almost always accompanied by Marcos Diaz. People around her described the man's behavior as total control. He made a point of staying close to Johanna during nearly all of her activities and waited for her to finish any meetings she attended. These details only became known later, when detectives began reconstructing the final months of her life. The night of July 15 into July 16, 2010 unfolded against the backdrop of a harsh Patagonian winter. A large party was taking place in Pico Trunco when the couple arrived together. Guests quickly noticed something unusual about their interaction. Although Johanna and Marcos Diaz moved through the venue side by side, witnesses observed clear signs of tension. They spoke more quietly than usual, exchanging serious, focused looks. Those present described it as an argument carried out in code, an apparent attempt to hide the substance of their disagreement from others. At certain moments, Johanna's facial expression changed noticeably, which attendees interpreted as extreme discomfort. At approximately 4 a.m., the couple left the building. From that moment on, the case becomes marked by serious factual discrepancies. Investigators were unable to construct a single clear version of how Johanna ended up outside the city. 3 different accounts emerged based on statements from separate groups of witnesses. Music. Some claimed the two left together, continuing their argument outside. Others insisted that Marcos Diaz drove away alone, leaving his companion behind. A third version suggested that Johanna stepped aside to speak with someone at the party and then disappeared. This window of time became critical. Just hours later, Johanna would be found in the forest and Marcos Diaz would be among those whose actions that night required close scrutiny. After Johanna Casus was discovered, investigators in Pico Trunco began forming a circle of suspects. Their attention focused on Victor Cingolani. He became a primary person of interest due to his past personal connections with the victim's family. Police found it suspicious that the same man had entered into relationships with both twin sisters. From the prosecution's perspective, the shift from a relationship with Johanna to a romance with Edith suggested an inability to sever an emotional attachment to the first sister. Another factor in the case was Cingolani's social reputation. Court documents described him as an individual with a difficult temperament, prone to conflict, and possessing ties to the criminal underworld. These traits allowed investigators to construct a profile of a potential perpetrator even before direct evidence was obtained. Soon, biographical data was supplemented by technical forensics. Gunshot residue was discovered on Victor Cingolani's hands. The prosecution interpreted this music as proof of the recent use of a firearm. However, the defense's explanations regarding potential contamination were completely disregarded. Cingolani lived among individuals who kept firearms at home. Music, which technically allowed particles to transfer to his skin through everyday contact. A decisive but controversial argument for the prosecution involved the work of canine units. Scent dogs were tasked with determining whether Victor Cingolani had been in the Cordon Forest stall area. This procedure was carried out 3 times. During the first 2 instances, when searches were conducted in the presence of independent witnesses and recorded on video, the dogs failed to find any trace of the suspect at the scene of the crime. However, during the 3rd outing, the situation shifted. This time, the procedure was handled exclusively by police officers and no video recording was made. It was only away from public scrutiny that the animals signaled the presence of Cingolani's scent in the forest. Based on this series of circumstantial evidence, investigators stopped pursuing other leads. Victor Cingolani became the primary and sole target of the justice system, despite the fact that not a single piece of direct evidence placing him in the woods on the night of the incident was ever produced. In 2011, the legal proceedings in the Johanna Casus case moved into their final phase. Music. Victor Cingolani stood as the only defendant in the trial. The prosecution built its stance on the gunshot residue analysis and the canine search results conducted by police without external oversight. Arguments from the defense were systematically rejected. Music. Victor Cingolani provided a detailed timeline of his movements. On the night the crime was committed, he was inside a casino until 6:30 a.m. This information was corroborated by a woman who accompanied him that night. However, the court officially declared her testimony false and excluded it from the music evidence. Simultaneously, defense attorneys pushed for the questioning of 2 police officers who could confirm Victor Cingolani's presence at the gaming establishment during those hours. Despite receiving official subpoenas, both witnesses failed to appear in court. The absence of testimony from individuals with the status of public officials was not considered grounds to postpone the hearings or review the materials. The judicial authorities deemed the collection of circumstantial evidence sufficient to establish guilt. The final ruling, 13 years of incarceration for the commission of the crime. The reaction of the parents to the sentencing was unequivocal. Valentin Casus, a member of local law enforcement, expressed full agreement with the verdict. He publicly stood by the findings of his fellow officers, maintaining a stoic and stern demeanor. Johanna Casus viewed the ruling as a just penalty for the loss of her daughter. For most residents of Pico Trunco, this verdict marked the final chapter of the investigation. Music. As of 2011, Victor Cingolani was officially recognized as the sole individual responsible for the events at Cordon Forestall. Yet, unresolved contradictions remained. The defendant's alibi was never verified through technical means, and the testimonies of witnesses who could confirm his whereabouts were never heard in court. Following the 2011 sentencing, the Casus family effectively ceased to exist as a unit. Edith openly declared her belief in Victor Cingolani's innocence, putting her in direct conflict with her Parents. Marcelina and Valentine Casus viewed their daughter's stance as a personal betrayal and a deep insult to the memory of Johanna. This domestic rift quickly spiraled into a public confrontation. Valentine and Marcelina claimed that Edith had always harbored a deep-seated envy toward her sister's successes. They pointed to the titles Johanna had won and her status as the family favorite, contrasting this with Edith's more reserved and guarded nature. According to the mother, Edith's defense of the perpetrator was fueled by a desire to step into her late sister's shoes. The parents went as far as to label their second daughter the black sheep who failed to live up to their expectations. In response, Edith stopped trying to find common ground. The situation eventually forced Edith to leave her parents' home. She moved in with Victor, Cingolani's sister, and act Valentine Casus, music, viewed as a permanent severance of their bond. From that point on, Edith was no longer considered a member of the family by her father and mother. In Pico Truncadue and within the Casus household itself, her actions were interpreted as a calculated attempt to finally claim her sister's partner and social standing for herself. Despite the fact that Edith and Victor Cingolani had officially been seeing each other since 2007, accusers insisted that the loss of Johanna was the only way for Edith to escape constant comparison and to fully possess the man who, in her parents' eyes, had always belonged to their golden daughter. The public backlash soon included other family members. Edith's cousin issued a public statement harshly, music, condemning her behavior, while Marcelina and Valentine continued to insist on Cingolani's involvement in the crime. Edith began to integrate into the perpetrator's family and openly gave interviews, confirming her devotion to Victor. This rift became a point of no return, setting the stage for an event that would ultimately turn all of Argentine society against her. On February 14, 2013, a day celebrated in Argentina as a holiday for lovers. Music, a crowd gathered outside the registry office in Pico Truncadue. Most of those present were not invited guests, but rather protesting citizens. People brought signs, stones, and eggs. Law enforcement established a perimeter to ensure the safety of the area. Edith Casus arrived at the ceremony in a short red dress, completely rejecting the traditional white gown. Not a single member of the Casus family accompanied her. Marcelina, Valentine, and other relatives ignored the event entirely. Victor Cingolani was brought to the registry office under heavy escort. The man was in restraints, transported from the facility where he was serving his court-ordered sentence for the crime. The legal proceedings inside the building took about 30 minutes. Only one television network was granted access to film the ceremony, while other media representatives remained outside. Only the groom's relatives were present as witnesses to the union. Upon completion of the official part, the couple stepped out onto the porch. The appearance of the newlyweds was met with shouts and a barrage of stones and eggs from the crowd. Officers formed a human corridor to shield Cingolani and Edith from the impacts. The man was quickly placed into a patrol vehicle to be transported back to his cell. Edith left the square alone and headed to her husband's parents' home. This event solidified her status as an outcast in Pico Truncadue, while Cingolani returned to his facility as a married man. Investigators already possessed a piece of evidence capable of overturning the results of the 2011 trial. While Victor Cingolani remained behind bars and the public fixated on his wedding to Edith. Music, the technical side of the investigation was in motion. A piece of evidence recovered at Cordon Forest Toll on the day the body was found had been sent for advanced genetic testing. It was the same partially burned cigarette that police had documented at the scene back in July 2010. Music. For reasons that never received a clear official explanation, the DNA analysis of this item was only completed in 2012. The material had sat in storage for 2 years before the test results were finally added to the case file. The laboratory results completely shifted Victor Cingolani's legal status. The genetic profile extracted from the cigarette but did not belong to the convicted man. Instead, the material was a direct match to the DNA of Marcos Gabriel Diaz, the man who was Johanna's partner at the time of her passing and with whom she had left the party at 400 a.m. This scientific confirmation compelled judicial authorities to officially reopen the investigation and begin a comprehensive review of the 2011 trial records. During these new investigative steps, a second piece of evidence was finally identified: a vinyl record. Several witnesses during follow-up interviews confirmed that this item belonged to Marcos Diaz. According to their statements, the record was a permanent fixture in his pickup truck. Investigators once again brought in Johanna's friends for questioning. This time, the witnesses provided details that had never been documented in the original reports. Marcos Diaz was known in Pico Truncadue as an individual prone to aggression who consistently carried a firearm. As long as he remained at large, witnesses were terrified to provide testimony against him. Friends of the deceased informed investigators that Johanna had been planning to end her relationship with Marcos Diaz and was seeking a way to leave him, fearing how he might react. The presence of Diaz's DNA at the scene and the identification of his personal property at Cordon Forest Toll allowed police to shift the direction of their search. In 2013, Marcos Diaz's status changed from witness to the primary suspect. Scientific proof confirmed his presence in the woods during the hours when the shots were fired, making the theory of Cingolani's guilt effectively groundless. In July 2013, Marcos Diaz stood trial for the crime committed against Johanna. This proceeding only became possible after genetic analysis of the cigarette butt and the identification of the vinyl record from his vehicle linked him directly to the scene. Under the weight of this evidence, Marcos Diaz altered his initial story. He officially stated to the court that he could have committed the acts attributed to him, though he did not provide a detailed confession regarding the full circumstances of that night. The change in Marcos Diaz's legal status and his subsequent detention altered the Behavior of key witnesses. Johanna's inner circle, who had provided only superficial statements in 2010, began offering new facts to investigators. Friends explained that their prolonged silence had been driven entirely by the defendant's reputation. During the court hearings, facts emerged regarding Diaz's total control over Johanna's life. According to the new case materials, the woman was living in isolation and lacked any autonomy over her own time. Witnesses confirmed that on the night of the incident, a heated argument took place between Johanna and Marcos Diaz inside his pickup truck. After examining the body of evidence and the defendant's own admission regarding the possibility of him firing the shots, the court delivered a verdict: 12 years of incarceration for the commission of the crime. Immediately following Marcos Diaz's conviction, Victor Kingolani's defense initiated a push for a case review. His attorneys pointed out a legal absurdity. Two different individuals who were not acting in coordination could not both be imprisoned for the exact same crime committed by a single person. However, the lower court that convicted Diaz initially denied Kingolani's appeal. The legal system created a precedent where Victor Kingolani remained behind bars despite the existence of another officially recognized perpetrator. This legal stalemate forced Victor's lawyers to escalate the matter to the Supreme Court while Marcos Diaz began serving his designated term. To reconstruct music. The events of July 16, 2010, we must go back to the moment the couple exited the club. While the initial years of the investigation saw conflicting accounts of their departure, even suggesting Johanna might have left alone, the 2013 trial materials cleared up these contradictions. The discovery of Marcos Diaz's DNA at the scene and the identification of his personal belongings allowed investigators to confirm. At 4:00 a.m., Johanna and Marcos Diaz entered his pickup truck together. The dispute that witnesses had noted back at the venue continued inside the vehicle. Instead of heading toward their home, Marcos Diaz drove beyond the residential blocks of Pico Trunco. The pickup moved toward the wooded area known as Cordon Forestol. The vehicle came to a stop in a deserted sector on the outskirts of the municipality. In this location, Marcos Diaz, who was armed with a firearm, fired 2 shots at point-blank range. This resulted in the immediate passing of Johanna. Right afterward, the man began his departure. Amidst the winter twilight and his own haste, he left behind the very items that would later secure his conviction. While standing near the scene, Marcos Diaz, music, discarded a cigarette butt, the item upon which experts would discover his genetic material. 2 years later, at that same moment, a personal item fell from the cabin of his vehicle onto the ground, a vinyl record. Marcos Diaz fled the Cordon Forestall area in his pickup, leaving Johanna in the brush. This reconstruction, backed by scientific data, finally settled the question of exactly how the victim ended up in the woods, music, and who was by her side during her final moments. In 2013, the Supreme Court of Argentina brought the case of Victor Kingolani to a definitive close. All charges were officially dropped and the original conviction was vacated. The man was released from prison after 3 years of wrongful incarceration. Upon his exit, he was surrounded by members of the press. Cingolani gave several interviews, confirming his plans to build a life with Edith Casus. However, trying to return to a normal routine in Pico Truncadue proved difficult due to social ostracization. Even with the exoneration, music, many in the community remained skeptical of Victor. The couple stayed together for 3 years before the marriage ended in divorce. In 2021, music, Edith Casus remarried and welcomed a son. The arrival of the grandson led to a partial healing of her relationship with her mother, Marcelina Casus. Valentin Casus, however, has not moved from his original stance. To this day, the father refuses to see his second daughter, still considering her actions during the